Did you know that your concerns may be hindering your ability to fully appropriate God's promises? In this video, we will explore the profound truths that Jesus left us about trusting God and His promises, freeing us from anxiety and fear. Watch until the end, as the last teaching is the most crucial. Number 1. The burden of worry and Jesus' invitation. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of obligations dragging you down, as if each step you took was more painful than the last, while your mind turned in circles looking for solutions that never seemed to appear? If the answer is yes, know that you are not alone. The truth is that we often carry burdens that were not ours to bear. The most impressive thing is that there is a way out, an open invitation that lasts through the centuries, coming from someone who understands the weight you carry. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11. This is a personal, direct, and powerful invitation that we often forget to accept. Imagine, for a moment, that you are crossing a desert with a backpack full of rocks. With each step, the heat becomes unbearable, and each stone makes the burden even more intolerable. Suddenly someone approaches and says, "Let me carry that backpack for you." You hesitate, perhaps out of pride, or because you believe it is your responsibility. But the offer is clear, an outstretched hand, ready to lighten your load. This is how worry operates in our lives. It becomes a heavy backpack, full of fears, anxieties, and insecurities that imprison us and drain our strength. Jesus is always present, prepared to carry this burden. What we often fail to recognize is that worry, at its core, reflects a quest for control. We want to control what happens tomorrow, next week, or even next year. We worry about bills, work, health, and family, believing that, without control, everything could fall apart. However, the paradox is that the more we try to control, the more we lose direction. Worry traps us in an endless cycle of anxiety and fear without providing us with solutions. When we give our concerns to Jesus, we release the reins, allowing the one who has control of everything to lead us. Jesus not only promises to relieve us of the weight of worry, but also offers us a rest that does not depend on external circumstances, but arises from an unshakable trust in God. Psalm 55 verse 22 presents us with this promise: "Cast your care on the Lord, and He will sustain you." It is an invitation to set aside the weight of worry and embrace God's unfailing care. However, you may be thinking that it is easy to say but difficult to do. And truly trusting and letting go of control can be scary, like jumping off a cliff, not knowing if there will be a net to welcome you. However, this is the beauty of faith. It is not about having all the answers, but about trusting those who have them. God, like a loving Father, knows every detail of our lives, down to the hairs on our heads. He is already in control, even when we don't realize it. The question is not whether we will face problems, but how we will deal with them. Will we continue to carry these burdens alone, or will we accept Jesus' invitation, placing them into His hands? The world teaches us that worry is natural, part of life, but Jesus presents us with a different path, a path of trust that transforms everything. Because when we trust, we find rest. Number 2, worry and faith. Have you ever wondered if it's possible to have faith and still be consumed by worry? It's a question many of us face, especially in a world full of uncertainty, where each new challenge seems to test our faith. However, the reality is that faith and concern cannot fully coexist. They are like day and night, one erasing the other. When we allow worry to dominate our thoughts and decisions, we are, in effect, affirming that our confidence lies more in our own abilities than in the power of God. Jesus confronts us directly with this truth in Matthew 6 verse 30, where He asks, "Now if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, He will not much more clothe you, O men of little faith?" In this verse, we clearly see the relationship between our anxiety and lack of faith. Worry becomes a reflection of how much we still try to sustain ourselves on our own strength, believing that if we don't control everything around us, things will fall apart. The big lesson here is that God is in control of every detail, even those we cannot see. Consider faith as an anchor. When the sea of life is roiled by storms of uncertainty, financial problems, family issues, or health challenges, Faith is the anchor that holds us steady. Without it, we are like a boat adrift, tossed from one side to the other by the waves of our anxieties. However, when we decide to genuinely trust God, the waves may continue to roll, but we will not be shaken. Faith provides us with stability, while worry throws us into chaos. Imagine for a moment that you find yourself in a dark room holding a lit candle. The candle symbolizes your faith. Now, consider worry as a strong breeze that begins to blow. If you don't protect the flame, it will soon go out, leaving you in darkness again. This is the effect of worry on our spiritual lives. It suffocates our faith, makes us forget divine promises, and leaves us lost in the midst of circumstances. However, if we protect this flame, feeding our faith through prayer, reading the scriptures and trusting in God, the light remains burning, guiding us even in the darkest moments. The dilemma is that we often want our faith to function as a kind of insurance against adversity. We believe that when we exercise faith, God will deliver us from all difficulties. However, true faith does not imply the absence of problems, but is the certainty that God is by our side in the midst of them. When we allow worry to dominate us, we undermine that certainty, valuing our fears over God's promises. The scriptures repeatedly guarantee their faithfulness. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us that we know that God works in all things for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Therefore, faith does not eliminate the reality of challenges, but transforms the way we face them. Worry is an attempt to control the uncontrollable. Faith is letting go of that control, trusting that God has a greater plan, even when we can't see it. It is a trust based on the essence of God and the works He has already accomplished. Thus, reflection becomes inevitable. How do we deal with our moments of crisis? Are we allowing worry to extinguish the flame of our faith, or are we protecting it? Let us remember that the God who takes care of the birds and lilies also watches over every detail of our lives. The choice is ours: live at the mercy of worries or anchor ourselves in faith. Furthermore, have you ever felt that incessant need to control every aspect of your life, to plan everything down to the smallest detail, to foresee every obstacle and ensure that everything goes according to your plans? If we stop to reflect, the desire for control is actually a response to fear of the unknown. It's as if we tried to keep the key to all the doors, believing that this way we would avoid unwanted surprises or disappointments. However, the reality is that the more we try to control, the more frustration we generate, as life, in essence, is unpredictable. The Bible offers powerful insight into this in Proverbs 19 verse 21. Many are the plans in the heart of a man, but the purpose of the Lord prevails. This verse confronts us with an inevitable truth. No matter how much they plan, no matter how much they try to anticipate and control what is to come, there is always something greater at work: divine purpose. Often, what we consider a failure in our personal plans is actually part of a divine plan that we cannot fully discern. Controlling is like trying to hold sand in your hands. The more we squeeze, the more the sand slips between our fingers. In the end, we realize that, despite all our effort, the control we so desired was always beyond our reach. Trust, on the other hand, is giving up that control and allowing God to direct the course of life. It's letting go of the need to know everything, to anticipate every movement and rest in the certainty that God has a plan, even when we can't understand it. The example of Abraham illustrates this point well. God called him to leave his land, his family, and everything he knew, without offering a clear destination. Instead of controlling the situation, Abraham chose to trust. He didn't know where he was going, but he was fully aware of who he placed his trust in. Hebrews 11 verse 8 highlights, "By faith, when Abraham was called, he obeyed and went out to a place he was to receive as an inheritance, even though he did not know where he was going." This faith was rewarded because Abraham allowed God to guide his journey. However, our human inclination is to resist this surrender. We want to know the result before we even start. We want guarantees. But trusting in God means precisely following a path that we cannot always see in its entirety. It's like crossing a bridge shrouded in fog. You don't see what's on the other side, but you know that the bridge is there, solid, supporting your steps. Life constantly challenges us to choose between control and confidence in moments of crisis. When everything seems out of order, the first reaction is to try to rearrange things on our own, as if we have the power to solve everything. But on most occasions, these attempts only increase our stress and frustration. It is precisely at this moment that God's invitation becomes more audible. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do the rest. Psalm 37 verse 5. This verse reminded us that true peace lies not in control, but in trust. Trust is not synonymous with inactivity or passivity. It's not about crossing your arms and waiting for things to just happen. Trust is handing over our plans, anxieties, and fears to God, aware that He works in all things for our good. It's continuing even when we don't get clarity about the next step, because we know that God has already prepared the way before us. Therefore, faced with life's uncertainties, the question we are left with is, will we continue to try to control, or will we learn to trust? When we allow ourselves to trust, we find rest. Not the rest that comes from the absence of problems, but the rest of knowing that no matter what happens, God is in control. It is this confidence that provides us with the strength to continue without carrying the heavy burden of control, but with the lightness of those who walk under divine guidance. The example of Moses illustrates this confidence in the midst of the impossible. Imagine being faced with a seemingly no-win situation. On one side, a fierce army ready to destroy everything in its path. On the other, a vast and impenetrable sea. With no resources, no options, and no visible hope. This was the scenario that Moses and the people of Israel faced when fleeing Egypt. The sense of panic and despair was palpable, and certainly many were asking themselves, are we just here to die? But in the midst of this chaos, Moses did not look for human solutions. He did something unusual. He trusted God completely. Even when all seemed lost, in Exodus 14 verses 13 to 14 we read Moses' response to the people's panic. Do not be afraid. Stand still and see what deliverance the Lord will bring about for you today. For the Egyptians whom you saw today you will never return to again. See, the Lord will fight for you, and you will be silent. This radical trust in God, at such a critical moment, shows us that faith is not based on visible circumstances, but on the power and faithfulness of God. Moses did not try to find a quick solution or a strategic exit. He simply trusted. How often do we find ourselves in situations where everything seems to be against us? Problems, family crises, health challenges, or uncertainty about the future. At these times, our instinctive reaction is to look for a way to escape, to resolve the situation with our own strength. But the lesson of Moses is clear. There are times when it's not about fighting, but about trust. Trusting that God is working behind the scenes, even when everything around us seems chaotic. It's like being at a dead end. The temptation is to start climbing desperately or look for a way to break down these walls. However, sometimes God asks us to wait, because He is about to break down these obstacles in unimaginable ways. The crossing of the Red Sea was one of those moments. The people of Israel did not imagine that the sea would part before them, but that is what happened. The impossible became possible because Moses trusted, and that trust allowed God to perform one of the greatest miracles in history. Moses didn't have a plan B. He did not rely on his own wisdom or military strength to deliver the people. His faith was completely in God, and that is the crux of the matter. Complete trust in God leaves no room for doubt or human alternatives. When we trust fully, we give God absolute control of the situation, knowing that He is powerful to do infinitely more than we can imagine or plan. This story invites us to reflect on how we deal with crises in our lives. Are we trying to swim against the tide, or are we willing to wait for God to pave the way? Often, the divine solution does not follow human logic. The sea opening up for the people of Israel seemed impossible, but that was exactly what happened. The most impressive thing is that what became a path of salvation for God's people also resulted in destruction for Israel's enemies. The same sea that saved also drowned. When we turn our battles over to God, He transforms circumstances in ways we cannot predict. Trusting God, even in impossible situations, is the key to experiencing the supernatural. Perhaps you are facing a sea in your life today, a situation that seems insurmountable. The lesson of Moses reminds us that when we trust fully, the impossible becomes an opportunity for God to manifest His glory. Instead of trying to control, fight, or flee, choose to trust. God still opens seas. Now, regarding concerns about the future, Hosea's story is revealing. When we think about the future, our thoughts are often dominated by fears and an endless list of what-ifs. What if things don't go as planned? What if problems pile up? What if there is no solution? These worries about what's next can consume our minds and paralyze us. However, the Bible presents us with a story that defies this human logic, the story of Joseph. If anyone had reason to worry about the future, it was him. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned, Hosea faced a series of situations that would make anyone lose hope. However, instead of despairing, Hosea chose to trust. Joseph's journey, narrated in the book of Genesis, is a brilliant example of how trusting God, even when the future seems uncertain and dark, can change everything. Sold into slavery and taken to Egypt, Joseph could have given himself up to fear, far from his family and with no prospect of redemption. However, the Bible tells us that the Lord was with Joseph, Genesis 39 verse 2. And this divine presence made all the difference. Instead of allowing worries to dominate his life, Joseph continued to trust, even when circumstances were beyond his control. The most impressive thing about Joseph's story is that, even in his darkest moments, he did not lose sight of his faith. When he was falsely accused by his wife of being a Potiphar and thrown into prison, he could have given in to bitterness, but instead he remained faithful and patient, trusting that God had a plan, even if he didn't know what the outcome would be. This trust was rewarded in an extraordinary way. The boy betrayed and sold into slavery became the second most powerful man in Egypt, used by God to save not only his own family, but an entire nation during a great famine. This story challenges us to reflect on how we face our own dilemmas regarding the future. How many times do we let worries stop us from realizing what God is doing? How often do we forget that even in the most difficult moments, God is engaged in a work far greater than we can conceive? Joseph's narrative teaches us that, even when we cannot understand the circumstances, we can have faith that God is working out every detail for a higher purpose. In Genesis 50 verse 20, after reuniting with his brothers, Joseph utters one of the most impactful statements in the Bible. "You planned evil against me, but God turned it for good, so that today the lives of many would be preserved." This statement encapsulates the essence of trusting in divine plans, even when everything seems to fall apart. Joseph could not have anticipated, while he was at the bottom of a well or in an Egyptian prison, that he was being prepared for such a grand mission. The same God who turned Joseph's tragedy into triumph is the one who has control over our lives. Today, like Hosea, many times we are unable to see the complete picture. We face periods in which everything seems to go wrong and the future appears unclear. However, trust in God gave us the necessary strength to persist, aware that He is operating in something that transcends human vision. Hosea's trajectory demonstrates that the path towards the future may cross dark valleys, but, in the end, God's purpose always prevails. Giving up worrying about the future is not equivalent to ignoring the challenges that present themselves, but rather to a conscious decision to trust God at every step of the journey, even when everything seems uncertain. Just like Joseph, we can be assured that when we trust in the Lord, He will transform even the most challenging circumstances into unimaginable blessings. Considering the episode of Jesus on the boat during the storm, we find peace in the midst of chaos. Imagine yourself on a vessel in the center of a stormy fury. The waves crash violently, the wind howls around you, and the darkness seems to consume everything. Your heart races, your hands shake, and fear begins to take over. This was the scenario faced by Jesus' disciples one night on the Sea of Galilee. They, experienced fishermen, knew how to proceed, but the storm was unique and terrifying. They struggled to stabilize the vessel, but the fear of death hung over them, while, in the midst of the chaos, Jesus slept. The account in Mark 4 verses 35 to 41 takes us to the heart of this episode, where Jesus, at the height of the storm, remained peacefully asleep. At first this seems incomprehensible. How can anyone rest when everything around them falls apart? However, this is a powerful representation of the peace that Jesus offers. The terrified disciples woke Jesus up with the question, "Master, don't you care if we die?" They were in a panic, but Jesus, taking his time, stood up and said to the wind and waves, "Be still, be still." Instantly, a great calm emerged. This scene teaches us a profound lesson about trusting God in the storms of life. Just like the disciples, we face moments of chaos, confusion, and fear. Often, like them, we feel that we are alone, fighting against adversity, while it seems that God is distant or even asleep. Our initial reaction is often panic. We believe that we must face the storm alone, and, when we realize the lack of control, fear paralyzes us. However, Jesus was in the boat the entire time. His presence did not change the situation, but it revealed that, even in the midst of chaos, true peace is not determined by the absence of problems, but by the presence of Christ in our lives. Jesus on the boat symbolizes the guarantee that, even in the greatest storms, there is a peace that transcends human understanding. He did not promise the absence of storms, but he guaranteed his presence and power to calm the waves when the time was right. This metaphor is clear. In our lives, storms can manifest themselves in different ways: financial crises, health problems, family conflicts, uncertainty about the future. Such storms can generate a feeling of helplessness, as if they are sinking us. However, the story of Jesus calming the storm reminds us that as long as he is with us in the boat, we have no reason to fear. He has absolute control over the wind and the waves, over circumstances that seem out of control. One of the most relevant lessons we can extract from this narrative is that fear only exerts power over us when we forget who is in the boat. After calming the storm, Jesus questions the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4 verse 40. The outer storm was threatening, but Jesus was focused on the disciples' inner storm, their fear and lack of faith. He wanted them to trust even before they glimpsed calm. If we look around us, it is easy to identify storms. The world is full of chaos and uncertainty. However, Jesus offers us a peace that surpasses what we are capable of understanding or explaining. Philippians 4 verse 7 teaches that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. The peace he grants is not superficial. It is a peace that sustains us, even when the waves of life threaten us. The question is not whether the storms will occur, but how we will react to them. Will fear or faith guide our response? We can try to fight the waves alone or remember that Jesus is on board, ready to calm the storm in his time. When we trust in him, we find a peace that transforms even the deepest chaos into moments of serenity and rest. When it comes to worrying about other people's opinions, how many times have we found ourselves anxious about what others think about us? Whether it's about our decisions, appearance, choices, or even our faith, the desire for acceptance and approval from those around us can become an invisible prison. Often, our clothes, the way we express ourselves, and even our beliefs are in constant flux. However, living this way is like walking a tightrope, always trying to balance who we are with other people's expectations. This incessant search is, for the most part, exhausting and takes us away from our true essence in God. The Apostle Paul, in Galatians 1 verse 10, asks a direct and challenging question. Do I now seek the approval of men or God? Or am I trying to please men? If I were still pleasing men, I would not be a servant of Christ. This verse reveals a truth that we often avoid facing. The incessant search for other people's approval compromises our ability to genuinely serve God. When we care more about the perception of others than about God's opinion, our faith and identity become weakened. Living according to external expectations results in a foundation as unstable as a house built on quicksand. As opinions change, standards vary, and what is accepted today may be rejected tomorrow. What remains, then, is a life lived around something ephemeral and volatile. However, by anchoring our identity and trusting God, we build on a solid foundation that does not shift with the tide of public opinion. He knows us deeply, and his discernment is not influenced by fads or human judgments. It is important to remember that, Often, other people's opinions emerge from insecurities, projections, or disagreements. Jesus faced criticism, rejection, and misunderstanding throughout his journey. In John 15 verse 11, he states, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that before it hated you, it hated me. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own." If even Jesus, being perfect, faced criticism and rejection, how could we, who are imperfect, expect different treatment? The key is to keep in mind that our acceptance emanates from God, not the world. Profound liberation occurs when we stop seeking approval from others. It's like letting go of invisible chains that bind us to unrealizable expectations. When we live to please God, we find unparalleled peace and security. It's not about completely disdaining other people's opinions, but about not allowing them to function as the compass that guides our lives. True guidance must come from the Word of God, which guides and molds us according to His purpose. Furthermore, the desire to please others can distract us from our true mission. How many times have we stopped following the divine call for fear of what people might think? It is simple to give in to the trap of shaping our actions and decisions based on external judgment, but this distances us from the true calling that God has assigned to each of us. The fear of criticism or rejection should not overcome our obedience to God. Living with this freedom, disassociated from other people's opinions, does not imply behaving arrogantly, but it does imply living with silent confidence that God knows us and approves of us. He calls us by name, and His voice should be the one we hear above all others. This not only frees us from the shackles of worry, but also allows us to be authentic in our faith and who God created us to be. Finally, it is crucial to remember that only God understands the big picture. He knows where we are going, and what He has prepared for us. When we place our trust in Him and set aside external opinions, we begin to live with more freedom, peace, and purpose. 8th point, anxiety regarding daily provision. Waking up each morning with an already overloaded mind, worried about bills to pay, family support, or uncertainty about the future is a reality that many know well. This anxiety for provision becomes a constant, a shadow that follows us. Questions like, will I be able to pay the bills at the end of the month? Or what if something goes wrong? They become common companions. However, Jesus offers us a radically different perspective on these concerns. He invites us to trust in divine provision in a way that transcends human logic. In Matthew 6 verses 25 to 26, He confronts us with a powerful truth. Do not be anxious about your life as to what you will eat or drink, nor about your body as to what you will wear. Is life not more than food and body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns. This passage challenges us to abandon anxiety about provision and trust in the God who cares for every detail of His creation. The image of birds is especially striking. They don't worry about tomorrow. They don't wake up with the burden of thinking about what they're going to eat or where to find shelter. They simply trust that the provision will be available. Jesus invites us to observe this phenomenon as a reminder that the same God who cares for the birds also cares for us. If He cares about such small creatures, how much more does He care about His children? However, we often forget this and cling to anxiety, as if we were the only ones carrying this weight. The truth is that anxiety about provision is a reflection of our lack of trust in divine providence. When we allow ourselves to be consumed by worry about what to eat, where to live and practice, we are saying that we do not trust that God is able to meet our needs, as if we need to take control, fearing that He may fail. However, this is far from reality. God is our provider. Often, what we wear, how we speak, and even our beliefs are intrinsically linked to the expectations of others. However, living this way is akin to balancing on a tightrope, constantly trying to harmonize our essence with what others want us to be. This effort, most of the time, is exhausting and takes us away from our true identity. In Galatians 1 verse 10, the Apostle Paul asks a blunt and provocative question. Am I seeking the approval of men or the approval of God? If I were still pleasing men, I would not be a servant of Christ. This passage reveals a truth we often avoid confronting. The relentless pursuit of validation from others prevents us from genuinely serving God. When we care more about other people's opinions than about divine perception, our faith and identity are compromised. Living according to external expectations is like trying to build a house on quicksand. Its structure will never be solid, as opinions and standards are fickle. What is accepted today may be rejected tomorrow. So what remains? A life guided by something ephemeral and transitory. However, by basing our identity and trust in God, we are building a solid foundation that will not shift with the tides of public opinion. He knows us deeply, and His vision is not influenced by fads or human judgments. It is crucial to remember that many opinions come from places of insecurity, projection, or misunderstanding. Jesus Himself faced criticism and rejection on His journey. As mentioned in John 15 verses 18 to 19, "If the world hates you, remember that before it hated you, it hated me." So if even the perfect Jesus passed through barriers of judgment, why would we who are imperfect expect any different treatment? The key lies in understanding that our acceptance emanates from God, not the world around us. There is a profound freedom that reveals itself when we stop seeking external approval. This is like undoing invisible chains that bind us to unattainable expectations. When we live with the intention of pleasing God, we find a peace and security that the world cannot offer. It's not about completely ignoring what people think, but about refusing to let those opinions guide our lives. The true compass must be the Word of God, which guides and molds us according to His purposes. Furthermore, the desire to please others can distract us from our original mission. How many times have we avoided following the calling that God has entrusted to us for fear of what others might think? It is easy to fall into the trap of shaping our actions and decisions based on the judgment of others, which distances us from each other's authentic vocation. The fear of criticism or rejection should not overcome our obedience to God. Living with the freedom of not being tied to external opinions does not imply arrogance, but it is silently trusting that God knows us and approves of us. He calls us by name, and it is His voice that must prevail over all others. Not only does this free us from the shackles of worry, but it also allows us to be more authentic in our faith and the identity God has given us. Ultimately, whatever the makeup of who we are or the purpose God assigns us, only He can see the bigger picture. He understands where we are going, and what He has in store for us. As we place our trust in Him and let go of other people's opinions, we begin to live with greater freedom, peace, and purpose. Anxiety about daily provision is a reality that many of us deal with. Waking up every day with an overwhelmed mind, worried about the bills to pay, supporting the family, or what the future may bring, is something deeply known. Such anxiety becomes a constant and a shadow that haunts us. Questions like, will I be able to pay the bills at the end of the month? Or, what if something goes wrong? They become daily companions. However, Jesus offers us a radically different perspective on these concerns, inviting us to trust in divine provision in a way that transcends human logic. In Matthew 6 verses 25 to 26, He challenges us with a powerful truth. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Then food and the body more than clothing? Observe the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns. This passage urges us to let go of anxiety about provision and trust in the One who cares for every aspect of creation. The image of birds is particularly striking, as they do not worry about tomorrow. They don't wake up anxious about what they'll eat or where they'll find shelter. They simply trust that the provision will be there. Jesus invites us to observe this as a reminder that the same God who cares for the birds also cares for us. If He cares about such small beings, how much more will He care about His children? However, we often forget this and cling to anxiety as if this burden were exclusively ours. The truth is that anxiety about provision reflects our lack of trust in divine providence. When we allow ourselves to be consumed by worry about what we will wear, eat, or where we will live, we are, in effect, declaring that we do not trust God's ability to meet our needs. It's as if we say we need to take control because He may fail, but that's far from reality. God is faithful, and yet He was allowed to face a series of unimaginable tragedies. He lost His wealth, His children, and ultimately His health. If anyone had reason to despair and give in to despair, it was Job. Yet, in the midst of his pain, Job makes a statement that defies our human understanding. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1 verse 21. This phrase, spoken at a time of immense loss, reveals something extraordinary about Job's faith. He understood that, even when everything seemed out of control, God was still sovereign. Instead of holding on to what he had lost or rebelling against God, Job chose to trust. This trust was not blind or superficial. Job was not oblivious to his pain. He cried, lamented, and questioned, but through it all, he never lost sight of the truth that God was in control. Often, when we are suffering, we tend to focus on the present, on the immediate pain. We want quick answers, immediate solutions. We wish the pain to disappear as quickly as possible. However, the story of Job teaches us that there is something deeper in suffering, an opportunity to trust God in ways we might never experience in times of peace. Job teaches us about patience in the midst of suffering and about the hope that remains firm, even when everything seems lost. James 5 verse 11 in the New Testament refers to Job as an example of perseverance. You have heard about Job's patience and have seen the end the Lord provided for him. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Job's story does not end in suffering. God restores everything Job had lost and more. However, the central point of the narrative is not just material restoration, but the journey of faith and unshakable trust that Job took. He walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged on the other side with a deeper understanding of who God is. What we often forget is that God is not far away. He is there, even when we cannot see or understand him. Job experienced God's silence, which was perhaps the most difficult aspect of his approval. He cried out for answers, but for a while he got none. And yet, he trusted. Sometimes God allows us to go through periods of suffering and silence, not because he doesn't care, but because something is being molded within us that can only be developed through patience and trust in the midst of pain. In the end, God revealed himself to Job, demonstrating his sovereignty and greatness. Job never received a detailed explanation of his suffering, but he gained something even more valuable, a deeper revelation from God. And that is exactly what suffering, when faced with faith, can offer us. A richer and more intimate experience with the Creator that transcends human understanding. If you are going through a moment of suffering right now, remember Job's example. Suffering, although painful, does not define the end of the story. God is present in the midst of your pain and, just as he was with Job, he is with you. Even if you don't see the end of the tunnel, God is working on something bigger, something that may not be visible at the moment, but will, in time, be revealed. Suffering invites us to trust God, not because we understand everything, but because we know he is faithful. The fear of failure is a powerful force. It paralyzes us, makes us doubt our capabilities, and, often, prevents us from moving towards the dreams and purposes that God has planted in our hearts. This fear convinces us that failure is inevitable, that we are not good enough, and that we will not make it to the other side. However, in the midst of this whirlwind of doubts, the Bible presents us with an inspiring story about faith, fear, and failure. The narrative of Peter walking on the water. In Matthew 14 verses 28 to 31, we find the account of Peter, an ardent disciple who dared to ask Jesus for something extraordinary. While the disciples were in a boat in the middle of a storm, they saw Jesus walking on the water. Filled with fear and confusion, Peter cried out, "Lord, if it is you, send me to meet you on the water." Jesus responded with one simple word, "Come." So Peter, with his eyes fixed on Jesus, got out of the boat and began to walk on the water. For a brief moment, he did the impossible. Peter's faith, at that moment, was greater than fear, because he had placed his trust in the power of Jesus, which allowed him to take steps over something that would normally sink him. However, something changed when feeling the wind and seeing the waves around. Peter looked away from Jesus, allowing fear to creep into his mind, and the result was immediate. He began to sink. This scene is a perfect metaphor for the fear of failure we face in our lives. When we keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, we can accomplish the impossible and face challenges that, in the eyes of the world, seem insurmountable. However, as we begin to focus on the circumstances around us, the difficulties, the problems, and the doubts. Fear takes over, and we begin to sink. Peter did not sink because he lacked ability, but because he allowed fear to cloud his faith. Fear of failure is one of the biggest obstacles in our journey of faith. God often calls us to do something that seems daunting. Starting a new project, serving in a new way, or even trusting Him in areas of our lives that we have been trying to control. Just like Peter, we are called to get out of the boat, to abandon our comfort zone. And, like him, we are capable of accomplishing things that seem impossible, as long as we keep our eyes fixed on Christ. However, the big lesson here is not just about overcoming fear. This is what happens after Peter starts to sink. He cries out to Jesus, "Lord, save me." Instantly, Jesus reaches out His hand and catches him. This is the heart of the story. Jesus did not reproach Peter for trying and failing. He saved him the moment Peter cried out for help. This teaches us that, even in the face of failure, or when fear brings us down, Jesus is always willing to lift us up. Failure does not represent an absolute end, but an opportunity to experience God's grace and power in an even deeper way. This narrative challenges us to reflect on how we face the fear of failure in our lives. How many times do we hesitate to take steps of faith for fear of what might happen, or how many opportunities do we miss by focusing on the waves around us instead of directing our gaze to Jesus? From the divine perspective, failure is not to be feared. It is an integral part of the growth process. Just like Peter, we may stumble and sink on some occasions, but the hand of Jesus is always outstretched, ready to support us and lift us up. In the end, Peter teaches us that the point is not to avoid failure at all costs, but to learn to trust God more than our fears. Failure is part of the path of faith, and each bold step leads us to growth. Jesus does not ask us for perfection. He craves trust. When we decide to step out of the boat, trust Him, and confront our fears, we discover that He is there for us, even when the winds blow harder. The fear of failure is legitimate, but the presence of Jesus is supreme. The concern with the search for riches, illustrated in the parable of the foolish rich man, reveals that the search for financial security, material comfort, and accumulation of goods has become, for many, a life objective. Society teaches us that the more we own, the greater our security. However, this incessant pursuit of riches can lead us down a dangerous path, building trust and value in material things rather than in God. In doing so, apprehension about money becomes a burden that consumes our thoughts, actions, and even our relationships. Jesus, aware of this dilemma, shared an insightful parable that instructs us on the true cost of preoccupation with riches. In the narrative of Luke 12 verses 16 to 21, Jesus presents the story of a man who, after an abundant harvest, decided to build bigger barns to accumulate his riches. He thought he would have enough for many years and planned to rest and enjoy life. But God warned him, "You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you." The reflection that this parable provokes is profound. Where does our heart reside? The rich fool believed that his wealth guaranteed his security. He accumulated so much that he felt at the mercy of worries and knew how to relax in a life devoid of anxieties. However, he ignored that his life was under God's rule. The heart of the problem lies not in the wealth itself, but in the way he handled it. Consumed by the desire to preserve and expand his possessions, he neglected what really mattered: his relationship with God and others. The parable illustrates that when our lives revolve around the incessant search for riches, we become foolish, losing sight of what is eternal and essential. The rich man did not care to use his abundance to bless others or glorify God. His only concern was for himself. Restlessness with riches ties us to a scarcity mentality, even when we have enough, always yearning for more. This is the trap that Jesus wants us to avoid. In Matthew 6 verses 19 to 21, he warns us against the accumulation of earthly treasures, which are vulnerable and ephemeral, as opposed to the accumulation of heavenly treasures, where nothing can destroy them. According to Jesus, true wealth is not measured by the goods we possess, but by the state of our heart and our faith. Excessive concern about finances can distract us from our true purpose, leading us to neglect what really counts: moments with family, dedication to others, and service to the kingdom of God. When we focus on the temporary to the detriment of the eternal, we lose sight of the truth. The parable of the rich fool reminds us that, after all, material riches are fleeting. What lasts is the impact we leave and our relationship with God. Jesus concludes this narrative with a warning. This is what happens to those who accumulate riches for themselves, but are not rich toward God. This is the real challenge. God does not reprove the possession of resources, but rather the way we use them, in glorifying Him and blessing others. The apprehension of earthly riches keeps us away from true wealth, which consists of living in communion with God and according to His purposes. Therefore, the question we must ask ourselves is, where is our treasure? Are we seeking security in the things of this world, like the rich fool, or do we trust in God as our source of provision and security? The weight of financial worry can keep us from true peace and the purpose God has for us. Jesus invites us to let go of this burden, trust in His provision, and live for something great, which goes beyond the mere accumulation of goods. Life is like this, a journey through the unknown, where each step carries the possibility of surprises, challenges, and also uncertainty. As we walk, we try to grab the reins, adjust our direction, and predict what will come ahead. But the truth is that control of the future slips out of our hands like fine sand. However, this journey into the unknown does not need to be walked with fear or anxiety. Over the centuries, God's people have found a source of confidence that illuminates even the darkest days. It is a profound and transformative invitation, full trust in God. An invitation that changes the path of those who understand that the Creator knows and holds every detail of our history. It's easy to talk about trust when the skies are clear and the waters are calm. But what about when the storm approaches and the clouds thicken? It is at these times that uncertainty becomes oppressive and fear insists on taking the place of peace. Yet it is precisely at this moment that God's call becomes even more audible. Trust in me. Jesus Himself said, "Let not your heart be troubled. If you believe in God, believe also in me." John 14 verse 1. This confidence does not promise an absence of challenges, but it offers a certainty that transcends human understanding. Trusting God in the midst of uncertainty is, in a way, a renunciation. Giving up the need to know what will happen tomorrow, the desire to control every outcome, and the desire to avoid all suffering. It's like giving up the steering wheel, handing it over to the one who knows not only the road, but also every detail of the landscape and the final destination. This trust in God challenges us to live lighter, knowing that, even when our plans fall apart, His plan remains in place. In the book of Proverbs, ancient wisdom reminds us, "Many are the plans in the heart of man, but the purpose of the Lord prevails." Proverbs 19 verse 21. This ancient wisdom echoes through time, offering precious comfort. We may have our own aspirations, but God, who sees the beginning and the end, holds our story in His hands. He takes care of the outcome, shaping each step with a love that surpasses all understanding. Trusting God in uncertainty, then, is not a weakness but a strength that sustains us when everything around us seems uncertain. It is the secret to a peace that is not shaken by circumstances and a hope that does not fade. It is, above all, a daily choice. A choice to open your heart and say, "God, I trust in you." Jose's story begins in a scenario of love and jealousy. He is Jacob's favorite son, a young man with big dreams who envisions something bigger, something that no one around him seems to understand. His brothers, jealous and hurt by favoritism, plan an act of betrayal that would change Joseph's destiny forever. They sell him into slavery, and he is taken to Egypt, away from the land and family he knew. Imagine Jose, young and alone, facing a reality that seemed completely opposite to the dreams he once had. His story, which had begun with dreams of greatness, now seemed to sink into a pit of uncertainty. But even in the midst of this darkness, Joseph never loses trust in God. Arrested and unjustly accused, Joseph remains firm, maintaining his faith in the greater purpose that God would have for his life. Years pass, and, at the perfect time, Joseph is elevated to the position of governor of Egypt, being responsible for saving an entire nation from famine. When his brothers finally find him, he reveals a profound perspective. "You intended evil against me, but God turned it for good. Genesis 50 verse 20. What seemed like a set of tragedies was, in fact, the hand of God weaving good through difficulties. Joseph understands that God never abandoned him, and that each painful step was part of a redemptive plan. And so we turn to Abraham, the father of a promise that seemed impossible. God had promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, but the years passed, and Abraham and Sarah remained childless. Abraham's faith was tested with each decade of waiting, each year that brought more questions than answers. When everything indicated that it was too late, God fulfilled his promise. Abraham and Sarah, already advanced in years, finally hold their son, Isaac. Hebrews 11 verse 11 tells us that, by faith, Abraham received the ability to be a father, as he trusted in the faithfulness of the one who had promised him. These stories show us that trust in God turns even the impossible into reality. Each of these lives reveals an essential truth. God is not only present in moments of victory, but also in periods of waiting and valleys of suffering. He sees beyond momentary difficulties and shapes each experience to fulfill his purposes. Joseph and Abraham are examples that trusting in God means seeing life beyond circumstances, recognizing that the Lord transforms all things for good. These testimonies of faith remain alive to remind us that, in God, even the most adverse situations carry the potential for redemption. Each character's journey is an invitation so that, today, we can also trust that God does not forget his promises, and that he is working, often in ways that our eyes cannot see. In the midst of a life full of ups and downs, the Christian finds unshakable hope, something that is not shaped by the circumstances around him. This hope rests on the promise of a glorious future, where God is present in every detail, leading each moment towards an end where peace and plenitude are complete. It is not a temporary peace or a truce between difficulties, but an inner peace that cuts through even the storms of life. In Revelation 21 verse 4, we find an inspiring and comforting vision. God himself will wipe away every tear from the eyes of his children. There will be no more pain, nor death, nor suffering. This is the final destination he has prepared, a place where all present afflictions dissolve in the glory of his presence. But until the day comes when this promise is fulfilled, this peace is a constant companion, sustaining the Christian in every moment of uncertainty and challenge. It is a peace that transcends understanding, an invisible strength that allows you to walk on unstable terrain with confidence. It's like a gentle song that echoes amid the chaos, reminding us that even when life seems to fall apart, God is shaping every piece of our story for the greater good. The Christian faith is based on this mystery, the certainty that, even if our eyes cannot see the purpose in the midst of suffering, God is present, working in silence. This peace then becomes a shield against anxiety. It's not that anxiety doesn't come, because it will come, in moments of uncertainty, loss and pain. But it's just that, even in those moments, the heart knows that there is something beyond what the eyes can see. Confidence that God is in control frees the Christian from the need to anticipate every outcome, to solve every problem on his own, because he knows that, ultimately, the story he writes is perfect. For the first Christians, and for those who today walk in the same faith, hope in the final outcome is like an anchor. It holds the soul firmly, giving it stability and strength to face each day. Thus, with this peace and hope, the Christian can live differently. Even if everything around is turbulent, even if personal expectations seem to collapse, there is the certainty that God is already taking care of the end. It is this confidence that allows the Christian to look to the future with courage, knowing that the author of his story is faithful to lead him to the promised glorious end. Thank you very much for watching this message. I hope these lessons have touched your heart and encouraged you to trust God and his promises even more. Explore, research, and continue walking this journey of faith. See you in the next video. May God bless you.